We've kind of compressed portion of our first hour into the second hour as well with our panel of youths here on Youth Points. Look forward to this conversation. We have Emily, Russell, and Carly who have joined us. We are continuing conversation with our earlier guest. We have Sheriff Asa Buck here in the studio along with Mom from Jacksonville and Ray Connor, who is the Program Director of Port Human Services. We're talking about the issue of opioid abuse. And the question that came in near the end of the program from John down east, John, good job. Thank you. Was, well, what's causing this? The topic basically is evolving around this issue of an epidemic of drug abuse. We're going to continue this conversation here in a few moments. First, to remind you, the numbers, if you'd like to join us, 252 area code 247-7282, 910 area code 353-4674, toll free 800-818-2255, via email at viewpointsradio@hotmail.com, and via Facebook at Viewpoints on the Talk Station. I want to go back to the comments and first thank Russell, Carly, and Emily for being here this evening. We'll get into this in a few moments. Ray, you said something a few moments ago as we were wrapping it up. Tell me about your current patient load there at Port Human Services. I'm going to get you to pull that microphone to you here.
We treat adults. We treat from ages 18 and up.
Okay.
A lot of our patients are, I would say, in that young adult demographic.
And the question that John was asking was, and we've heard this from Dr. Patkar, who we spoke to last week, head of the Duke Center for Addiction, is that correct?
That's right.
As well as being a member of the task force.
He is.
The governor's task force.
We served on the same subcommittee together.
I brought up the question. He said it's a form of chemical, it's a crutch for coping skills.
Often that's the case. As I mentioned earlier, when you think about addiction, we are either trying to enhance a good feeling, a good emotion, or else we're trying to lessen a painful emotion.
Okay, but I asked you, are we setting our youngsters up for a fall?
I think in some cases we are. I'm an old guy, so I'm generationally challenged here.
Okay.
But I think in some cases we are. And again, going back to some research that I've done, 70s and late 70s, 80s, where the big kick was on for enhancing children's self-esteem. Barney, everybody gets a trophy. We've basically, in some cases, have created a narcissistic demographic of young people, and not just young people, but some of us as older folks have kind of gotten in on that craze as well. Well, there's that sense of entitlement where I am owed certain things, certain pleasures, certain gratifications, without necessarily having to invest the work and the effort.
We've talked about this. My grandchildren have recently explained this to their parents, and I said, I've heard about this thing called Skittles parties. What surprises me, and we've talked about this in the past with our panel here, that number one, we've seen an increase in youngsters more inclined to want to use pills versus alcohol. That kind of surprised me. One of you three, Emily, Russell, would you share with us why folks would want to consider pills versus alcohol?
I think that our generation considers pills a cleaner way to get high because they're prescribed by a doctor, and that means they're safe.
I'm glad to hear him say that because that validates what I've been saying. I'm not glad to hear him say that because prescription drugs are not a safe vessel to get high. I was actually doing an interview this morning with a reporter from the BBC in England where they're trying to tackle this issue as well. And I was explaining that the prescription drug issue has been, with regard to using the drugs to get high, is a misperception in the minds of people, younger people and older people, who think that, well, this is medicine. Medicine is safe. Medicine's supposed to help you. This prescription is written by a doctor, someone who's going to school to do this job. You get the prescription filled at a pharmacy from a nice man or woman who fills the prescription and puts it in your hand. So there's a misperception that this medicine is safe. Well, it's not for somebody if it's taken in a manner that's not prescribed by a physician.
And I would argue that the assumption that taking a pill is addictive. We've heard the stories about how smoking can be addictive, how drinking can be addictive. Is it a matter of also in the school system that, I mean, if you've got a headache, take an aspirin or buy ibuprofen. So they don't offer you, if you've got a headache, take a swig of beer, right? But they do say take an aspirin. So you were kind of primed for accepting a pill as being a solver,
yeah,
right?
I think we have the idea that if you have a problem, take a pill, you'll be fine. And also, I think another reason why prescription medication could be used more highly than alcohol would be it takes less to get the effect. For a pill, you can take one pill, go to your house, and you don't have to work for it. But if you're using alcohol, if you're using
you have to consume a lot.
Yeah, you have to work for
it. And by the way,
so
it's easier to hide one little yellow pill than it is to hide a pint of alcohol.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's the other issue. It's the access and availability, and that's something we've been preaching for years. And when we started doing the prescription drug turn-in program, medicine cabinets in people's homes, were just awash in all this medication, and it's just sitting there ripe for the picking, and oftentimes from a family member, children, grandchildren. And so we've been asking people, if you have this medicine in your home, if you no longer need it, get rid of it. But then, if you do need this medicine, don't just leave it laying around, because someone's liable to come take it from you. Someone could break in your home. It could be a family member.
Mom, first to you. Your son was taking these pills. Were you advised about the potential addictive nature of this drug?
No, I was not. When he would feel the need for a refill because he would say, oh, my back's hurting more, go in.
You were concerned. You were concerned about the health and welfare of your son.
Right. Because if your child's saying I'm hurting, you'll go ahead and take him to the doctor. The prescription would be rewritten. However, the dosage or the milligram, would increase. Right, because he was maybe building up a tolerance.
Oh.
Tolerance, of course, is a natural result. But when you don't take them, then you have to suffer through the withdrawals, and opioid withdrawals are very, very unnice.
Right, very painful. And I look back and I see where I don't want to say I did things wrong, because I thought I was doing things right, by filling those prescriptions. But then once I realized when he said there was the addiction problem, I never filled any more prescriptions. Yeah.
Let's go to some callers, and we'll start with Ernie in Emerald Isle. Ernie, good afternoon. Yes, sir.
Hey, good afternoon, Lockwood. I was listening with kind of half an ear. I was very busy. You had a guest on there that mentioned that the drug problem really got rolling in the 80s.
Now, what I mentioned was the real emphasis on self-esteem and building in children's lives was really tackled heavily and emphasized heavily beginning in the early 70s.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I want to just tell you my own personal experience. Lockwood knows my age. I'm roughly Lockwood's age. I was in the Air Force in the 60s, and I had firsthand experience with the beginning of the, if you want to call it a drug revolution. And I remember vividly guys in my shop. These are military service people, and they bachelor young kids living off base, and they lived in an apartment off base, and marijuana was the deal, right? And you got to come and try this. You got to come and try this. Well, I'm that kind of I'll try anything once. And I said, you got to be kidding. You think this is something? What impressed me was that at the time the military, they kind of glossed over that. Although they did know what was going on with that substance called LSD, and they cobbled up a very poorly made film at the time. They're not videos; they were film. And some worn out old NCO was talking about this stuff alters your mind and makes you crazy. And at that time, I was just amazed that I kind of realized that this stuff is bad news and is changing people. It makes them different.
Okay. Well, as a matter of fact, you bring up a good point. I'm curious about what are the long-term impacts of this. So, Ernie, thanks very much for the call.
Well, thanks for hearing this, and I just think that this problem is much more long-standing than you all think.
No, I don't know that we necessarily think we think it's long-standing, but now it's getting to the point where it's accelerating, and that's the real big problem.
When I was a young kid, drug use was confined to the musicians,
right?
Black and white, and you know, people talked about it, but it wasn't part of our culture or our life, and it started. The change started in the late 60s.
You bring up a good point. I want to go to that very quickly. Thanks very much, Ernie. Appreciate that. Thank you, sir. You know, we were talking about this earlier, about the fact that off air that, and I don't know if it was Mom or someone said a while back that this particular drug use knows no boundaries. And as a matter of fact, it came from a story from Los Angeles Times, young lady, and I was just looking up the issue of what's happened in Huntington, West Virginia. I want to stick with you on this one, Ray. Ernie brings up a good point. Drugs historically has been a component or confined to a certain group of people. Now, not either basically social group of people, predominantly musicians, entertainers. It's now moved into athletes. Yeah, we've got doping scandals. Yeah. We've got that. That's part of this whole issue. We've become a pill society. Didn't used to be. Right. I mean, heroin and cocaine, to Ernie's point, was the primary activity of many artists. Why is that, in your opinion, that all of a sudden it's blended now, it's everywhere, and that Ace is seeing it on a regular basis with families of all walks of life?
It's more readily available. It's everywhere you turn. It's promoted. I've often mentioned that when you see Corona commercials, they don't feature people who look like me in them. They're young, they're bright, they're happy-go-lucky. So we're building a persona that makes it seem more acceptable, more attractive. Mm-hmm. What you don't see is behind the scenes, where you see the wrecked and twisted lives, and you see the carnage on the highways, and you see the broken families, and you see the detox centers that are filled to capacity and overflowing. So that's some of the hidden things that are not being addressed.
Okay, wait a second. You bring up a good point. Let me go to the teenagers on this. We have glorified and glamorized one of the stepping stones, alcohol. We got to bring up the issue of marijuana here in a moment. How many high schoolers are using marijuana, do you think? And you can be kind of broad, so what's your thought, Emily?
Okay, most high schoolers have done it at least once.
I would agree with that.
Okay, Carly, you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, Carly, I want to go to you as a middle school and freshman. By the way, are the Skittles parties and things like that, is that a middle school activity?
I'd say it's becoming more in middle school than it was when I was in middle school. I know nobody was doing that, but now I look back like at the middle schoolers coming into high school.
How old is a middle schooler? What's the age of a middle schooler?
13.
10 to 13.
Yeah.
Ray, let me grab that microphone.
Well, one of the things, too, I was going to mention that Carly brought up, I've talked to some probation officers in the last few months, and I'm sure Asa can speak to this better than I can. Heroin is even in middle schools today. So that's...
What?
Yeah. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, it's coming back. I mean, the heroin has come back.
Well, heroin's
to
part
our
of
country.
the opioid. It's an opioid. It's a form of opium, right?
Heroin is made from opium.
Yeah.
From the poppy plant.
Mom, I know you've been through hell.
Yes.
Is this enlightening you in any way?
Yes, it is, because, you can always look back and, see the signs, but when those signs in front of you, you don't see them. It's true. I mean, it's just once those pills are not available, these kids, they start, going to heroin, and that is scary.
It's cheaper.
Cheaper. Yeah, mm-hmm. It is. It's much cheaper, and my son said that he would never, when he's doing sports and all that, he said he would never imagine that this was his future. But yeah, we just really need to just realize heroin is the next step, and we don't want to get to that step.
Well, you say it's the next step. It strikes me that opioids in any nature are. I
mean, it's basically the same thing. I mean, if you're taking a 30 milligram oxycodone, I mean, you're taking synthetic heroin. I mean, it's the same thing. The difference is if you're taking something that's created in a factory, in a pharmaceutical factory, so,
and it looks
a 10 milligram oxycodone is a 10 milligram oxycodone. When you're shooting heroin and snorting cocaine, you don't know what's in that. It's cut with all kind of stuff.
And that's the fear.
And nowadays, I mentioned earlier in the last hour about fentanyl.
Fentanyl. Right.
And it's not pharmaceutical fentanyl in the United States. It's fentanyl that's manufactured in China, which is finding its way here in our country.
Okay, we've got some callers standing by. Before we go to the break, let me go to Bob in Morehead City. Bob, welcome to Viewpoints. Yes, sir.
I'm concerned about the lack of a possible lack of education of parents nowadays. Parents have got to teach their kids the problems with these things. We've had a lot of commercials on TV about teenage drinking in the past few weeks or so, and it be increasing. And I certainly agree with those ads. We might need to start running some ads for parents on drugs, and for these parents to start talking to these kids when they get to be 9, 10 years old about drugs, alcohol, and everything else. It starts in the home. It starts with the parents, and it starts with these kids. Don't let peer pressure get to them.
I definitely agree that we need to educate, but I don't know how you talk to a 9 or 10-year-old about that. Nobody when they're 9 or 10 says, I'm going to be a heroin addict. Nobody says, I'm going to be addicted to alcohol. Nobody says, I'm going to use opioids. We don't. It's not a thing. It's not like 9 or 10-year-olds now have the minds of 20-year-olds yesterday. I think it just happens in society. So saying you can educate them as much as you want, but things change really fast when you get to middle school, high school. It's really got to be a personal choice from that point, no matter what you're educated on.
Carly, I want to go to you on this one real quickly. The impact of peer pressure. And the reason I'm picking you on you in this is because you're the youngest one in the crowd. No, you're not a freshman, but you probably have. I don't think either Russell or Emily remember that far. No, but things have changed. To your point a moment ago, Russell, things have changed pretty quickly too. So how influential is peer pressure on this?
A lot. Because you see older kids or even people a grade older than you doing drugs, drinking alcohol, and you think, oh, it's the cool thing to do. I've got to do it.
Okay, I've got to make a correction to my earlier story. This coming from West Virginia City. It's Fox 13. West Virginia City has, catch this number, I said 7. I was off by a few. I was off by about 20. West Virginia City has 27 heroin overdoses in a massive 4 hours. There were 27 heroin overdoses within 4 hours, including death in Huntington, West Virginia on Monday. Officials believe the drug may be laced with something making it particularly dangerous. By the way, I just want to make mention of this because North Carolina was a leader in this. They have now determined in West Virginia, they are now giving law enforcement officers, what is that?
Naloxone.
Naloxone, which North Carolina was one of the first states to
issue a standing order that the naloxone could be prescribed to family members of people who were taking opioid medication. It's been distributed to law enforcement agencies in addition. Rescue squads have had Narcan, naloxone on board for some time, but now law enforcement agencies are actually carrying them on board and saving people's lives.
West Virginia is having such a severe problem with this. Okay, with so much to talk about, 3 assumptions we all agreed. Number 1, I can avoid being addicted. That's assumption number 1. Totally wrong. Number 2, these are just children being children. Being drug overdose, Skittles parties or things like this. We actually have parents who have, they've kind of turned a blind eye to this.
Right. Well, and especially towards the drinking and smoking marijuana. The governor refers to it, what he says back in his day, people used to say that was a rite of passage.
Right.
But they've really taken on the underage drinking issue, especially at our colleges and universities, because it's not a rite of passage. And it's very dangerous.
And then the other comment was made because Don Mrtanovich said drinking alcohol is a drug. The number of deaths as a result of alcohol use and abuse, double that of drug abuse.
Yeah,
44 million, 88 million for alcohol in the last year.
Alcohol will kill you
just
the same. It's somewhat different. Sometimes it's over time. Health effects, cirrhosis of the liver. But you take the number of people who get killed out here on our highways by people who are
drunk,
intoxicated, operating automobiles.
Okay, so the assumptions, the misconceptions are: one, I can avoid getting addicted. Mom would disagree with me on that one real quickly. 2, it's not a rite of passage. And 3, it'll never happen to me because I am the right socioeconomic, travel in the right circles.
Right.
To my teens, that's pretty stupid. You know people that are traveling in all the right, have all the right, punched all the right tickets. Okay. Ray, we're going to get back to this in a moment. I've got some callers standing by. Let me go to Dennis in Jacksonville. Dennis, thanks for joining us. Yes, sir.
Hey, good evening. Well, as I'm listening to you guys, I'm just thinking that there are just so many different influences that have led to this that I don't think you can nail down one or two things. When you talk about the use of drugs, it's come to my attention listening to you. I can't spend 10 minutes watching TV anymore without a major drug being advertised nonstop.
You got it.
So when you're talking about drugs, it's everywhere. And I don't know why they even allow this kind of advertisement. I think it should be ended because it really does just create this atmosphere where drugs are so prevalent that I'm sitting here watching it with my daughter and going, I need to turn this off.
Dennis, let me ask you a question of the teens. The issue that we have this environment where we've got taking drugs for every ailment, some that are real, some that are not, is that sort of supporting this theory that drugs are really not bad for you? Is that?
I think I'll go back to the statement I made at the start of this show that I think the general consensus in my age group, in my generation, is that if a doctor prescribes it, then it must be safe under any circumstance that you use it.
Under any circumstance.
And that's not true. So I think that's the major misconception we're dealing with.
Dennis, do you have that conversation with your daughter or children?
Well, I do my 14-year-old, not my 10-year-old.
I've heard it said before by others in this program that middle schoolers are having the Skittles parties and that even heroin has now introduced itself in middle school.
The thing is, I know where my daughter is, so I don't have to worry about her being at some party that I'm not aware of.
Okay, but
I'm not aware of who's there.
My
daughter doesn't head off to parties where there's no parents involved.
That might be right as far as that goes, but let me tell you one example why it's important to talk to our middle school students and even our elementary school students. We teach DARE in the 5th grade.
When I say my 14-year-old, I've been talking to her ever since she went to middle school.
Okay, all right, okay. But
from the beginning, so I didn't just begin this. I'm just saying that's her current age.
But hold on, I want to hear what Ace has got to say. That's very interesting.
It's just like everything in our society, things go around, and you'd be surprised how things kind of go around and things go around in the schools and with our kids. You take one child who makes the decision to go and take medicine out of mom's medicine cabinet and brings that medicine to school and gives it to his buddy. I mean, we've had these issues happen here in our county. Not long ago over in Pamlico County, some kids had some adverse effect. Middle school kids had some adverse effects from taking prescription medication at school. We've had it happen here. You take a child who's never been told any different, may not know any better, and he's got a friend at school who brings a pill to school with him and gives it to him, has no idea what that medicine is, has no idea how it's going to affect them. And we're talking about middle school age kids taking drugs at school and overdosing. And, one thing is at school because it's noticed. If you take a situation where it may be after school and, the person may not, they may not get medical attention that they need. We've actually changed I know I'm rambling now because I'm getting on my soapbox and I'm going from one aspect to another. But, we've even changed laws in our state because we've had so many overdoses where someone got scared and didn't call 911 and didn't get medical attention for a person and they died. And so, we have Good Samaritan laws in our state now so that if people are engaged in drug activity and there's some sort of overdose or something like that, they're not subject to being prosecuted for simply possessing drugs. But the main point is to get that person help because we're talking about people's children who have overdosed on prescription drugs or heroin or other drugs, and they've died because someone was too afraid to call 911 to get them help.
I think that's a fact that we definitely need to publicize more. I know from my friends and their experiences that there's been multiple times at parties or get-togethers where somebody's had too much to drink or too much of this and too much of that, and they haven't gotten the medical attention they needed because everybody was scared. Well, if I take her to the doctor right now, then I'm going to get charged. And so I think the Good Samaritan laws are great, and I think we definitely need to spread the word on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Dennis, before I move...
So let me hit a second point.
Okay.
A good friend of mine told me that universities today almost run on, I don't even know what they'd be called, but ADHD drugs. He said so many kids are on prescriptions that that during exam times they just get handed out like candy. And I think that just reinforces that whole idea of taking drugs.
Well, that's a stimulant, and the Adderall, the Ritalins, the Focalin, they're stimulants that for a person who is a legitimate diagnosis of ADHD, it keeps them focused, keeps them in a level keel. But for those who are not diagnosed, who do not have that as a disorder, that it speeds them up. And I've heard the same thing where I remember treating some folks where they spent 3 days nonstop because they took the Adderall, and it can be miserable after a while because you don't slow down.
Okay, one of you said Xanax is a drug of choice in high school? Okay, all right. What is Xanax?
It's a benzodiazepine. Commonly, they're used to treat anxiety disorders.
Okay, and Xanax is readily available?
To my knowledge, I think, and Asa may can speak more to this, I know in our clinic, benzos are not prescribed very often because of the addictive nature of and the abuse of them. But for a while there, all you had to do is go to a doctor and say, I'm nervous. Or I'm anxious.
They are highly overprescribed.
Yes, and you said that they can connection certain that along with another drug.
Well, mixing benzodiazepines with opioid painkillers is not to say that it can never be done, but it really needs to be done under strict physician care. And mixing those two drugs actually creates a situation where a person is 4 times more likely to overdose.
Wow. Hey, Dennis, thank you very much for your call. I really appreciate that. Thanks, sir. Thank you. Rick and Hubert, welcome. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hey, Lockwood, long time, no talk, bro.
That's fine. It's been a while. Go for it.
I just want to chime in on Asa Buck there. Kudos to him and Sheriff Hans Miller and all the sheriffs in the state of North Carolina, because this drug is rampant here. Mm-hmm. Our daughter just passed away March 25th in our home, in her bathroom on an overdose.
Sorry to hear that.
Wow.
This conversation that I'm hearing, this is all about them minimizing what's really happening in Onslow, Carteret, Craven. It's just off the chain. Until you see your daughter in a body bag laying in the middle of your living room, getting ready to be loaded up on a gurney and loaded into the back of an ambulance, it's horrible. It's just horrific.
Rick, what would you say to us, but also to anybody who's listening? Tell us what's running through your mind. What should we do?
Here's what I say, and get ready to beat me. Tell all these young kids that think getting high and doing drugs to be cool and have fun, to get their heads out of their asses.
Wow.
That's what I say.
Okay. Rick, I'm going to ask you to stay on the line. Will you please? I'll be right back with you. We're going to take a quick break here on Viewpoints, and we've got some callers standing by. I'll get the response of the audience here in the studio. Rick, I really appreciate your call. It kind of takes the breath away, to say the very least. Stay with us here on Viewpoints. Yeah. Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. I'm getting another statistic, but I'll leave this for later in the week from one of our panelists. We've got Emily, Russell, and Carly here in the studio with Youth Points. We've included our program from the first hour. We have Mom from Jacksonville, who's hopefully going to have her son in a rehabilitation program. Yes. We have Ray Connor from Port Human Services, where he's the program director. We've got Sheriff Asa Buck here as well. We've got some callers standing by. For those of you who missed the conversation a few moments ago, Rick waited very patiently to tell us about the fact that he lost his daughter to a heroin overdose. And so we've seen stories also of other instances in Onslow County of that same situation. John down east. John, I'm going to ask you real quickly, if you could, please.
It's tough. First off, to Mama Jacksonville, again, my thought processes are with you, and to the fellow whose daughter passed away from a heroin overdose, I don't even know what to say. It hurts. It hurts. How did we get here? I keep asking this question. Okay. How did we get here? We've had drugs for thousands of years.
Oh, my gosh, if we could condense that in a few minutes, we'd all be millionaires. I think it's a gradual process. It's just like on the coast here, we're so used to erosion. Most of our erosion is unperceptible until a big storm comes through. Then you really notice the devastating effects of it. But erosion is something that takes place little by little, almost imperceptibly.
Huntington, West Virginia, 27 overdose calls in 4 hours. Asa, how did we get here?
Well,
and by the way, we recognize this is speculation on your part, but I'm just curious. I think it's worth the discussion.
Well, I think there's a lot of literature to back up what I'm getting ready to say, and I don't want to put all of the onus on the medical community as a whole, because the medical community, I believe, has been sold a bill of goods over the years. Beginning in the late 80s and early 90s, the pharmaceutical companies had a lot of doctors going around the country talking about the safety and effectiveness of opioid painkillers, and factor in the benzodiazepines and the anti-anxiety medications to go along with it. You know, they were saying things like only 1% of the population could potentially be susceptible to addiction. That has been proven absolutely false. Anybody with any sense knows that's not the case nowadays. And then there was a move to treat pain. And, you know, a lot of that was kind of being pushed by the government, you know, telling doctors, if you're not treating pain, you're not doing your job right. You're not treating your patients.
By the way, just to remind everyone, the new Medicare laws require the Medicare and Medicaid patients to rank their doctors and their hospitals.
You have surveys. That's a big thing with hospitals.
And
you have these patient satisfaction surveys.
And if you walk out with back
Medicaid
pain,
reimbursement. You know, it's a number of different things. But, you know, when I started in law enforcement, you know, we were still dealing with, this is in the late 90s, the cocaine, crack cocaine, of course marijuana has been around forever, and other hard drugs. And you had a smaller segment of society that were doing these types of things. But as all this started to snowball with regard to prescribing the opioid painkillers coming along in the late 1990s, continuing up through today, as prescribing has increased, everything else has increased in direct proportion to it. Overdoses, deaths, babies being born addicted to drugs.
Let me switch this around to Ernie's point earlier. And Ernie, I'm going to bring you on, but Ernie, stay with me. Ernie's point earlier was historically drugs were the purview of a certain group in society, entertainers. But it started with heroin and cocaine. It's been reversed. It's starting in many instances with a little yellow pill or white pill.
Yeah, correct.
So you're going from that pill to the heroin, the snorting the cocaine and so forth. Ernie, I've got about 30 seconds. Real quickly, thank you for your patience.
I can't do this in 30 seconds, but I want to thank Sheriff Buck for shoveling sand against the tide, and sand is a euphemism for what I really wanted to say.
Right.
Having said that, this is about Dennis's call and the drug commercials.
Yep.
I am disgusted by it. If he listened well, he'll realize that these are targeted against old people, like me, you, and it's all about money. It's all about we're supposedly well insured. And I'm very offended. And if you ever listen to the disclaimers they make at the end of the commercial in very fast language, my wife looks at me and I look at her and I said, I'd rather have the sickness, the disease, or the symptoms than take this drug.
Ernie, thank you very much for the call. I appreciate that. We're wrapping this up. I want to thank Mom, Asa, Ray very much for your time. Carly, Russell, and Emily, thanks for making this a great program.
Very good.
I really appreciate this. You're listening to Viewpoints on the Talk Station, FM 107, AM 1240.